I approached my seat at the table and my husband's mistress grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave a bruise, spilling red wine down my dress. "Chris wants me to host tonight," she announced to the room. I immediately struck back, not with my hands, but with the one thing they couldn't afford to lose. At the family dinner, I had barely reached the head of the table when Morgan, my husband's new executive assistant, stepped into my path. She didn't just block me. She deliberately knocked her wine glass against mine. The dark red liquid splashed over my silk dress. Before I could step back, she grabbed my wrist. Her nails dug into my skin with shocking force, her grip tight and aggressive. The sprawling dining room of the Kensington family's Greenwich estate fell dead silent. Relatives were gathered around the massive mahogany table. Someone froze with a teacup in hand. Another hadn't even sat down yet, and someone else's smile was wiped completely off their face. Morgan stood before me in a light beige tailored suit, her corporate ID badge still clipped to her lapel. She was Christopher's new assistant, hired just 3 months ago. And in those 3 months, she had become the one outsider who appeared at the Kensington estate most frequently. Still gripping my wrist, she spoke in an entirely steady, carrying voice. "Diana, please don't cause a scene. Chris asked me to manage the seating tonight. You've been so disengaged lately. He felt it was best I take over hosting. Duties. You can sit down at the far end." I didn't yank my arm away frantically. I looked down at her hand, feeling the immediate throbbing where a bruise was already forming, and then looked her dead in the eye. Christopher was standing 2 steps behind her. He had been taking a phone call, but upon hearing the commotion, he turned around, seeing the wine on my dress and Morgan's aggressive grip on my arm. The color drained from his face. I didn't cry. I didn't ask him why this was happening. I simply pried her fingers off my wrist with sharp precision. I looked at her and spoke quietly. First, my role as managing trustee of the family office was assigned to me by the late grandmother Beatrice. Second, you are an employee, not a member of the Kensington family. Third, if you ever dare put your hands on me again, my attorneys will see to it that you face charges for battery. Morgan instantly let go, clutching her own chest as if I had attacked her. Her entire demeanor exuding boundless grievance. "Chris," she whimpered, uttering only his name. Christopher was already rushing over to us. I thought he would first look at the wine ruining my dress or the red marks on my wrist, but his first words were, "Diana, why are you making a public issue out of this?" The relatives' faces instantly animated. Someone murmured that Morgan was just trying to help. Someone else looked at Morgan with a hint of pity. Morgan's tears fell right on cue. "Chris, I was just trying to follow your instructions so she wouldn't embarrass the elders. I didn't expect your wife to get so violently defensive." Scoff. The throbbing pain in my wrist brought me to my senses. I turned to Christopher. "Do you also think I am the one in the wrong here?" Christopher opened his mouth, but he didn't answer immediately. That hesitation was an answer in itself. I slowly slid the diamond wedding band off my left ring finger. I had worn it for 3 years. His initials were engraved on the inside. On our wedding day, he slipped it onto my finger himself and said that the position of a Kensington wife could only be held by one person, me. I placed the ring on top of the iPad resting on the table. The iPad contained the master financial dashboard of the Kensington family office. The late grandmother Beatrice had legally delegated this authority to me before she died. Estate dinners, trust disbursements, charitable foundations, medical care for the elders, PR damage control, everything was managed through it. Over the past 3 years, none of the Kensingtons ever asked how I managed to keep the family afloat. They simply grew accustomed to every dinner being flawless, every holiday gift arriving perfectly on time, every relative receiving their monthly allowance, and every PR scandal being buried before it hit page 6. They thought this was just the natural state of being a Kensington. In reality, most of the time I was the one using my own independent wealth to cover their trust deficits to protect the corporate stock. I locked the iPad screen. The sound was soft, but it landed like a gavel dropping in the room. Since I am so disengaged, tonight's dinner is no longer my concern. My mother-in-law, Margaret, was the first to furrow her brows. Diana, what kind of scene are you causing? The house is full of board members and relatives. Do you really need to embarrass yourself? I looked at her. 3 years ago, you begged me to be a team player to protect Christopher's image as the new CEO. For 3 years I've managed the PR, the staff, the foundation, and paid the vendors out of my own pocket when your trust accounts ran dry. Pause. And today, Morgan publicly humiliates me and physically grabs me while my husband watches. I wash my hands of this. Margaret's face turned to stone. What kind of tone is that? I didn't grace her with another look. I picked up my iPad, turned around and walked toward the exit. Morgan suddenly stepped out, trying to block my path again. Diana, that dashboard access belongs to the Kensington family office. You can't take it. I stopped and glared at her. Do you even know what's inside it? She was taken aback. I took a step closer. You don't even know that Aunt Patricia is deathly allergic to wild mushrooms. You don't know that Uncle Charles's youngest granddaughter can't have honey. You don't know that Christopher's widowed sister Fiona has a strict NDA regarding her late husband. And you have the audacity to talk to me about the family office. Morgan palled. The expressions on several relatives' faces shifted uncomfortably. Christopher finally found his voice. Diana put the iPad down. We'll talk about this at home. I looked at him, and for the first time I felt like this man was a complete stranger. He knew exactly how important my security clearance was. He just didn't expect me to revoke it tonight. I glanced down at the wedding ring abandoned on the table. Chris, you just asked why I was making a public issue out of this. I met his eyes. Now I'll answer you. Because she humiliated me, put her hands on me, encroached on my authority, and you stood there in silence. His Adam's apple bobbed. I didn't. Whether you did or didn't, you'll find out when my lawyers contact you. With that, I walked out of the dining room. Clear's throat. No one dared to follow me. When I reached the grand foyer of the estate manager, Martha, hurried out from the kitchen. She ran the Kensington household staff and was the only one who had watched me carry this family on my back for 3 years. Mrs. Kensington, your dress, your wrist. I shook my head. Martha, I haven't authorized the wire for tonight's catering yet, have I? Martha looked confused. No, ma'am. You always approve the transfer after dessert. I pulled out my phone and opened my Chase private client app right in front of her. The estate's catering, the pharmacy bills, the landscaping for the conservatory, the driver's salary, the family gifts, 7 automated payments in total. I tapped into every single one and hit cancel. Martha stared at my phone, her voice trembling. Are you really cutting them off? Close the app. From tonight on, whoever manages the seating chart pays the bills. As I walked out the massive iron gates of the estate, the Connecticut evening breeze brushed against my face. My wrist throbbed, but clearer than the pain was the realization that I no longer wanted to protect anyone's public image. Behind me from the dining room came a commotion. The clattering of silverware, people calling for Christopher, someone asking who was going to pay the $25,000 catering invoice. I didn't look back. My phone vibrated. A text from Christopher. Don't do anything rash. The board is watching. Go back to our penthouse and wait for me. I read it and simply locked my screen. 5 minutes later, the catering manager called the estate. The bill for a 28-person dinner was $25,000. I used to always cover it when the trust was short, but not tonight. When I returned to our penthouse on the Upper East Side, it was dead quiet. This was where Christopher and I lived after the wedding. I picked out the sofa in the living room. I curated the art on the walls. For 3 years this was home. But tonight, all I saw was an empty shell filled with old habits. I changed out of the ruined dress and inspected my wrist in the bathroom mirror. The imprint of Morgan's fingers was already turning a deep purple. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate physical assertion of dominance. I took photos of the bruising with my phone evidence. My phone had been blowing up the entire drive. My mother-in-law had called 8 times. Christopher 12. The family iMessage group chat had accumulated over 100 texts. Opened it. Margaret had sent a long voice memo. I didn't bother listening to it, just read the audio transcription. Diana, tonight was a board-adjacent dinner. You threatened Morgan with a lawsuit in front of everyone and you took the financial dashboard. This is outrageous. Morgan is young. She acted hastily. As Chris's wife, you need to protect the stock value and be magnanimous. Below that, Aunt Patricia wrote, we are all family. Why risk a PR nightmare? A cousin's wife chimed in. Morgan is an employee. Sure, but she helps Chris with the business. Diana really did act unprofessionally tonight. I stared at those lines and suddenly I wanted to laugh. When I was publicly humiliated and grabbed, they were all silent. When I threatened legal action, they suddenly cared about professionalism. I was in no rush to reply. I opened my laptop and pulled up the encrypted cloud folders I had been compiling all these years. The master folder was simply named Kensington Audit. Inside were 12 categories: estate dinners, gifts, medical bills, loans to relatives, emergency wires to kill bad press, designer wardrobes, renovations, and personal transfers to my mother-in-law. Every single wire transfer from my independent accounts was accompanied by a screenshot and a corresponding trust deficit report. It wasn't that I was petty. It was simply that my father had taught me from a young age. In the world of high finance, if there's no paper trail, you will be the one left holding the bag. The front door clicked open. Christopher was home. He walked in without even taking off his overcoat. His brows were tightly knit. Diana, you really crossed the line tonight. I sat on the sofa and didn't move an inch. In what way exactly? My question caught him off guard. I answered for him. By refusing to sit quietly, by taking pictures of my bruised wrist, or by locking the family office dashboard. Christopher suppressed his anger. Morgan was wrong to put her hands on you. I will make her apologize, but threatening her with battery in front of all the relatives. You humiliated my mother. You put the company's reputation at risk. I looked up at him, and when she was assaulting me, the company's reputation was perfectly safe. He paused for a second. She's relatively new to the executive team. She doesn't understand high society optics. She doesn't understand, and neither do you. A heavy silence fell over the living room. Christopher's gaze shifted. I placed the iPad on the coffee table. Chris, do you know why I have the legal authority to run the family office? He didn't answer. It wasn't a favor, I said. Grandmother Beatrice legally appointed me as the managing trustee because she knew your mother and the rest of them would bankrupt the trust in a year. It's a fiduciary duty. I tapped the iPad. Only Morgan didn't know. But since she didn't know, why did she feel emboldened enough to publicly assault me? A flash of panic crossed Christopher's eyes. I didn't tell her to do that, but you let her believe she was untouchable. His face darkened. Diana, do you really have to make a mountain out of a molehill? A mountain out of a molehill. My heart felt as if it had been slashed by something thin but incredibly sharp. I picked up my phone and opened the first audit screenshot last month. Grandmother's memorial service. $35,000. The trust was overdrawn. I paid it out of pocket to prevent the vendors from leaking to the press. Second screenshot. Your mother racked up gambling debts at the country club and was terrified the board would find out. She begged me to wire her $20,000 to cover it. Paid it. Third, Uncle Charles's son was moving abroad. Borrowed $26,000 from the trust. Promised to return it. He hasn't. I balanced the ledger with my own money to pass the quarterly audit. Fourth, an engagement dress for your cousin. She said the family's public image demanded it and asked me to front $12,000. I swiped through the screenshots one by one. Christopher's expression slowly contorted. Why didn't you tell me about this? I looked at him. I did. He frowned. I reminded him. Last May when you were at the Global Summit in Dubai, I sent you a secure email that the trust disbursements were spiraling out of control and suggested we bring in outside auditors. You replied, "Handle the domestic affairs yourself. Don't bother me with it." Christopher pulled out his own phone as if wanting to check. I simply slid my screen toward him. That email was still there. He said, "With you managing the family office, I had peace of mind." I said, "You had peace of mind for 3 years. And now you let your assistant publicly manhandle me over a seating arrangement." His breathing quickened. "Diana, that's not what I meant." I didn't bother continuing because it was too late. My mother-in-law called again. This time I answered. Margaret's voice exploded through the speaker. "Diana, what is going on with the caterers? Why are they saying the wire hasn't cleared? Transfer the money immediately. Don't let the caterers leak this to page 6. I put her on speakerphone. Christopher stood right there and heard every word perfectly. I said, "Margaret. Morgan declared that she is managing the events now, so I am no longer violating corporate boundaries. Today, whoever arranged the seating pays the bill." Margaret was stunned for a few seconds before raising her voice. "What do you mean? Are you going to be this petty over $25,000? Scoff. $25,000 isn't that much. You can just ask Morgan to put it on her corporate card." Silence fell on the other end of the line. And then I heard Morgan's weak, pitiful voice in the background. "Mrs. Kensington, this is all my fault. I'll contact Christopher's finance department right now." Cut her off. "Morgan, private family dinners are not expensed through corporate accounts. That is a direct violation of SEC regulations. If you want to play at the top of the Kensington hierarchy, learn basic compliance first. Don't wipe your face with shareholder money." Christopher's face changed. "Diana, I simply ended the call. Only the two of us remained in the living room." He looked at me as if seeing me for the very first time. "You were never like this before." I set my phone down. "And what was I like before?" He stayed silent. I answered for him. "Before, I would have paid to keep the peace. I would have covered up your mother's embezzlement from the trust. I would have placated the board, and I would have pretended not to notice you bringing your mistress to the family estate." I stood up, pulled my backup Amex Centurion card out of the desk drawer. All the recurring estate expenses were tied to it. I grabbed a pair of scissors and cut the titanium card in half right in front of Christopher. "Chris, starting tonight, I'm done funding your illusions." He finally snapped. "What exactly are you trying to achieve?" I said, "Before my lawyers file for divorce, we're going to initiate a full forensic audit." His face froze. "Divorce?" I offered no further explanation. His bespoke suits still hung in the master bedroom. I didn't touch them. I simply packed my legal documents, the encrypted hard drive, my laptop, and some clothes into a suitcase. Christopher stood in the doorway paralyzed. As I walked past him with my suitcase, he grabbed my arm gently this time. "Diana," over one spilled drink and a grabbed wrist. I looked down at his hand. Then slowly I pulled away, not over a bruise. I looked up into his eyes, but because when it happened, I finally saw exactly what my dignity was worth to you. I walked out of the penthouse. Right before the private elevator doors closed, his phone rang. I could hear Margaret screaming through the receiver. Chris, the catering owner, just showed up at the estate, threatening to call the press. The elevator doors sealed shut. I leaned against the polished mahogany wall and let out a quiet breath. The first true bill had finally been issued. The next morning, Morgan made a post on Instagram. Carousel of photos. The first, her looking stressed in the estate dining room. The second, a text graphic. "Some positions require you to actually care about the people you serve. Too bad some people marry into power just to act cold and superior." She didn't name names, but everyone in our social circle understood exactly what she meant. Half an hour later, a cousin's wife sent me a direct message. "Diana, Morgan is out of line, but you really did overreact last night. Think of the company." Uncle Charles also texted, "Unlock the trust accounts. There's no need to involve lawyers and air dirty laundry in public." After reading them, I took screenshots of Morgan's post. Then I replied to Uncle Charles. "At 3:00 p.m., I will be at the estate with my attorney to review the trust discrepancies." Uncle Charles replied quickly, "What do you mean?" I didn't type anything else. That afternoon, I grabbed my legal binders and drove to Greenwich. My attorney Richard met me at the gates. The living room was packed with people. Even more had gathered than the night before. Morgan was there too, sitting next to my mother-in-law, looking like a victimized saint. Christopher sat near the head of the table. The seat itself was empty. No one dared to claim it. When I walked in with Richard, Margaret glared at me icily. "Graced us with your return, have you? And brought a lawyer?" I ignored her. Richard placed the binders on the table. "Last night's catering bill was $25,000. The restaurant is demanding payment today. I came as the managing trustee to lay all the cards on the table," Morgan said softly. "Diana, there's no need for this. Family dinner is family business. Bringing lawyers into this hurts people's feelings." I looked at her. "You're right." She looked confused. I pulled out a chair and sat down. "Which is why today we won't talk about feelings. We'll talk about IRS compliance and trust disbursements." Someone in the living room cleared their throat. Uncle Charles frowned. "Diana, are you serious?" He nodded. "Uncle Charles, you sit on the board. Help me verify today whether I have breached my fiduciary duties." I opened the first binder. Over the last 3 years, the estate has hosted 39 major family and charity banquets. Of those, 7 were paid from the corporate account. From my independent personal wealth. 28 from my mother-in-law's trust allowance. Margaret's face changed. "What nonsense are you spewing? Chris's trust always paid for the banquets." I slid the bank statements toward her. "Margaret, every single time you said Chris was stressed with the upcoming earnings calls and you had overdrawn your allowance. You begged me to front my own money to prevent board scrutiny. And then in front of the press, you praised Chris for his generosity." I opened the text history. Every message from Margaret was crystal clear. "Diana, don't mention this to Chris. He's under pressure from the shareholders. You're his wife. Just pay it out of your private account. Don't say a word or we'll look insolvent." Margaret lunged for my legal binder. Richard smoothly pulled it out of her reach. "Mrs. Kensington, these are legally protected documents." She turned pale with fury. Morgan immediately supported her by the elbow. "Mrs. Kensington, please don't get angry. Diana is just feeling resentful." I looked at Morgan. "Morgan, don't be in such a rush. Your audit is up next." A flicker of fear crossed her eyes. Continued. The second category, unauthorized trust loans. Uncle Charles's family, $26,000. Aunt Patricia, $20,000. Chris's sister, $12,000. Cousin's new car, $15,000. Several people in the living room shifted uncomfortably. The cousin's wife immediately blurted out. "Didn't they say that was part of the annual trust distribution? We didn't know it was your personal money keeping the accounts balanced." He nodded. "Which is exactly why I'm formally notifying you today. The trust was empty. Bailed you out." Uncle Charles picked up the printout and scanned it. His face grew darker by the second. He knew instantly the numbers were real. "Why does the memo on every transfer from Diana's account say PR maintenance?" Answered. "Because Margaret said writing bailout loan would trigger a red flag for the IRS." Margaret couldn't hold back anymore. "Diana, what are you trying to achieve? Do you want your relatives to pay you back?" I looked dead at her. "Obviously. Otherwise, I submit these documents to the SEC as evidence of corporate and trust mismanagement by the CEO's family." The living room exploded. Someone yelled that I had lost my mind. Someone else said I was trying to destroy the stock value. Another complained that the Kensingtons didn't welcome me into the family just so I could blackmail them. I waited for them to exhaust themselves. Then I pulled out the third folder. "There is one category I am writing off." The voices died down. I said the expenses for the private nurses, medications, and the clinic for grandmother Beatrice when she was ill. I acknowledged those. I paid them of my own free will. I looked at Christopher because grandmother was the only one who respected the law and this family's true legacy. Christopher had remained silent this entire time. Hearing this, he flinched. I didn't stop. "But the rest of the money, whether it's loans or fronted cash, must be returned." Stop using my wealth as a slush fund to maintain your billionaire facade. Morgan suddenly spoke up, her eyes re-eaning. Diana, you're threatening the company and putting so much pressure on the relatives. This is going to destroy Chris's career. I laughed out loud. Morgan, you haven't even signed an NDA yet. And you're already worrying about Chris's career. She paused. I pulled an invoice out of the folder. Last night, did you authorize a wild mushroom soup for dinner? Morgan froze. Yes, I was helping Mrs. Kensington coordinate the catering at $800 a tin, 60 portions in total. The invoice shows $8,000. She nodded. Those are the estate standards. I pulled out another receipt verified by my auditors. This morning my team called the supplier. They didn't deliver Alaskan king crab last night. It was a cheap imitation. The real cost was $800. The entire living room plunged into a deathly silence. The look of grievance on Morgan's face hardened. Margaret was equally stunned. I placed the two receipts side by side. Morgan, you were the point of contact. Where did the $7,200 difference go? She instantly looked at Christopher. Chris, I don't know. I just forwarded the prices the supplier gave me. I said, you didn't wire the final payment so you can claim ignorance, but you were the one who signed off on the final invoice. And you were the one who changed our legacy suppliers. Martha walked in from the hallway. In her hands was a stack of vendor logs. Mrs. Kensington is right. We used to buy provisions from a vetted list of purveyors. Last month, Morgan said that on Christopher's orders, she was taking over vendor procurement. I warned her that the late grandmother's standards couldn't be altered without board approval. She replied that Christopher was the CEO and didn't need approval. Morgan panicked. I never said that. Martha stared at her. Morgan, you said it in the kitchen right in front of the catering staff. Christopher finally spoke. Morgan, what is the meaning of this? Tears streamed from Morgan's eyes. Chris, I swear I just wanted to save the company money. No. I don't know the estate protocols. The supplier must have scammed me. I watched her. You don't know the protocols, which is why you publicly assaulted me. She choked on her words. Those in the living room who had been defending her just moments ago now averted their gazes. Terrified of being implicated in embezzlement, I closed the folder. Yesterday, Morgan posted that some positions require you to be worthy of them. I stood up and now I ask, an employee who is either incompetent enough to be scammed or corrupt enough to skim off the top. By what right does she dare put her hands on me? No one uttered a single word. Christopher looked at me with a complicated expression. Diana, we could have handled this internally. With HR, I turned to him. Yesterday, when I was assaulted, you could have defended your wife instead of worrying about the optics. His face turned chalk white. Picked up my binder. Today we've only audited the first quarter. Uncle Charles jerked his head up. There's more. I looked at him. Yes, the Kensington family owes me for more than just catering. I turned and walked toward the exit. When I reached the door, Morgan suddenly cried out through her tears. Diana, you hated me from the very beginning, didn't you? That's why you purposely hired auditors to frame me. Stop. Not me. I glanced back at her. You were the one who made it physical. And that was when I remembered that financial crimes can no longer be hidden for the sake of PR. She stood rooted to the spot. As I walked out of the estate, Christopher ran out after me. He stood on the grand steps, his voice. Diana, how much more damage are you going to do? I looked at him. I'm not doing the damage. I'm just finally showing you the bill. The true rules of the Kensington family aren't displayed at the dinner table. They manifest on days of mourning. Every year on the anniversary of Grandmother Beatrix's passing, the estate hosted a memorial luncheon. No press, no outsiders. Only close relatives gathered in the private family chapel on the grounds, followed by a board-level briefing in the library. When she was alive, Grandmother always said, the Kensingtons can lose their money, but they cannot lose their integrity. Therefore, this event was always organized by the managing trustee. For 3 years that was me. This year, my mother-in-law didn't notify me at all. I found out from Martha. When she called, her voice was very hushed. Mrs. Kensington, Margaret assigned Morgan to organize the memorial. She also said, "Since you are threatening legal action, you are barred from the chapel." I was in the middle of reconciling bank statements. Hearing this, I paused. What else did she say? Martha hesitated. She said the digital access codes and the trust are Kensington property. She's threatening to have security escort you out if you show up. I scoffed. All right. I'll be there tomorrow with my attorney. The next morning when I arrived at the estate, Morgan was wearing a modest high-necked black dress, her hair pulled back, holding a clipboard and giving instructions to the private security team. Seeing me and Richard, her expression shifted. But she immediately forced a soft smile. "Diana, you came." Mrs. Kensington said there would be a lot of sensitive conversations today. "And since you are in active litigation against the family, you shouldn't go in." I looked at the clipboard in her hands. "Who gave you the authority to dictate access to a trust property?" She lifted her chin slightly. "Margaret." I held out my hand. "I am the managing trustee." "Step aside." She didn't move. "Diana, this is internal Kensington family business." I almost laughed out loud. An employee stands in front of the Kensington family chapel and lectures the trustee about internal family business. I didn't try to push past her. I simply signaled Richard, who stepped forward with a cease and desist letter. Morgan panicked and threw her arm out to block me again. "Diana, don't cause trouble." I stopped, looking pointedly at her extended arm. "Morgan, the first time you grabbed my wrist and bruised me. The second time you are obstructing a legal fiduciary from entering a trust property." I looked her in the eyes. "Are you absolutely sure you want to test the limits of my restraining order?" Her arm trembled and slowly lowered. Inside the chapel, the senior family members had gathered. My mother-in-law stood near the memorial altar. Seeing me, she scowled. "Security was supposed to keep you out," I answered. "If the managing trustee isn't at the memorial, the IRS might wonder who is overseeing the charitable donations we report today." Margaret sneered. "Diana, you think too highly of yourself. After threatening the company's stock, you still have the nerve to stand before our ancestors." I didn't argue with her. Richard pulled a copy of a legal document from his briefcase and placed it on the altar table. "This is the irrevocable trust agreement signed before the marriage 3 years ago. Signed by grandmother Beatrice, witnessed by Uncle Charles and the corporate attorneys." Uncle Charles, sitting nearby, changed his expression. He took the document and frowned. The document explicitly stated, "The management of the family office, expense control, and trust properties fall under the sole legal authority of Diana Kensington. The family cannot replace the trustee without a ruling from the Delaware Chancery Court." Seeing the document, Margaret turned pale. "Grandmother is dead, and you're pulling out legal jargon to threaten us?" I said, "Margaret, 2 days ago, you accused me of being unengaged. Today, I brought the legal mandate that proves I run this family's infrastructure. And you say I'm threatening you," she choked. Christopher walked into the chapel. He clearly hadn't expected to see me there. Morgan trailed behind him, her eyes slightly red. "Chris," I couldn't stop her lawyer. Christopher looked at her but said nothing. I looked at him. "Did you authorize an employee to bar the managing trustee from a property?" He remained silent. Margaret answered for him. I instructed her. "You haven't given this family a moment of peace lately. I couldn't possibly let you ruin the PR photos today." He nodded. "Then allow me to ask why. In Morgan's seating chart, is Aunt Patricia seated below Uncle Charles?" Aunt Patricia was taken aback. Uncle Charles's face instantly darkened. In old money circles, hierarchy is everything. Making a mistake at a regular lunch is a faux pas, but at a highly photographed memorial, it's a direct insult that triggers boardroom gossip. Morgan hastily began to explain. "I saw that Aunt Patricia was older in age, so Uncle Charles let out a cold snort. An expert in optics, I see." Morgan's eyes re-eamed even further. "I just wanted to help." I looked at the clipboard in her hands. "And another thing, last year Fiona was widowed. She signed a strict NDA regarding her late husband's estate. Yet, you seated her next to a reporter from Vanity Fair who was invited as a friend of the family. Did you want to bait her into breaching her contract? Fiona paused and glared sharply at Morgan. Morgan completely lost her composure. I didn't know about the NDA, I said. So, by what right did you even step foot into this chapel and take it upon yourself to manage corporate risk? A deathly silence hung in the chapel. My mother-in-law's face flushed red, then white. Christopher finally spoke. Morgan, get out. She looked up at him, not believing her ears. Chris, get out. His voice was quiet but ice cold. Morgan bit her lip, turned around and ran out. I felt not a single drop of schadenfreude. I felt cold, not because she humiliated herself, but because Christopher only spoke up when corporate risk was involved. During the service, Uncle Charles suddenly said, Diana, the other night was a misunderstanding. We didn't have all the facts about the trust deficit. I didn't accept his apology. I simply rearranged the seating according to the strict protocols grandmother left behind, removed the reporter, and moved Fiona to a secure spot. When all the formalities were concluded, it was noon. I stood at the exit of the chapel, preparing to leave. Christopher walked out after me. You brought your lawyer today because you planned this all along. I looked at him. His gaze darkened. So, ever since that dinner, you decided to initiate a hostile takeover of the family. Not since that dinner, I said. Since the day you first let Morgan intercept a secure call from your mother instead of me. He froze. That was 2 months ago. That day, I was dropping off Margaret's medication and called Christopher to ask if he was coming to the board dinner. Morgan picked up his private line. She said, Chris is unavailable right now. If you have domestic issues, you can pass the message through me. In that moment, I knew he had erased the boundaries. Christopher said quietly, That day, I just had a little too much to drink at a meeting. She answered my phone by mistake. No. Kept my eyes on him. You have a lot of just busy, just drank, just forgot, just she doesn't know the protocols, just I'm overreacting. I took a step back. Chris, when there are too many justs, it becomes corporate negligence. He stared at me and a flash of panic finally broke through his eyes. Diana, I didn't want her to replace you. Scoff. But she was already standing at the doors of the chapel with security, barring me from entering. Those words hit him harder than a lawsuit. I turned and walked away. That moment my phone vibrated. My mother-in-law had sent a photo. It was a draft of a divorce settlement from her personal lawyers. It read, Diana Kensington voluntarily relinquishes all managing trustee rights of the family office, waives any claims for reimbursement of funds fronted to the trust, and signs an ironclad NDA regarding the internal finances of the Kensington Corporation. Uncontested divorce with zero alimony or division of assets. I stared at those words. Zero division of assets. I forwarded the document to Richard and renamed the file Evidence of Extortion to Breach Fiduciary Duty by Margaret Kensington. The next legal notice belonged to her. In the back wing of the Kensington estate was the secure server room for the family office. Grandmother used to store the hard copy ledgers there before everything went digital. It was a small room with biometric locks. For 3 years, I sat here and meticulously managed the family's wealth. Martha always told me I took it too seriously. Mrs. Kensington, the board has so much money. This is a rounding error to them. I would only smile. Whether it was a lot or a little was the shareholders' business, but ensuring everything was IRS compliant, that was my business. Now I realize, thank God I kept meticulous backups. Otherwise, today all my grievances would be dismissed by a team of corporate lawyers. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Richard and I sat in the server room. Martha walked in holding a box of physical receipts. Mrs. Kensington. Margaret tried to shred some of these and Morgan swapped out some others, but I kept copies for the kitchen records. Took the box. Thank you. Martha's eyes re-ened. Mrs. Kensington. I've worked for the Kensingtons for almost 20 years. After grandmother died, no one in this house truly respected your authority. They just wanted your money. My fingers paused. Grandmother was the only one in the Kensington family who actually treated me as an equal partner. When I married Christopher, everyone said I was a strategic asset. My family was wealthy but quiet old academics. No flashy corporate empire. Christopher was a CEO, young, brilliant, aggressive. But they didn't know that Christopher was the one who relentlessly pursued the merger of our lives. Before the wedding, he took me to see grandmother. She gave me the master codes and said, "This girl has the spine for it. She'll protect the family from itself." Back then, I thought protecting a family was a partnership, but it turned out Christopher simply locked me in the vault to manage the mess while he played the billionaire bachelor. Richard and I reconciled the receipts. It turned out that over 3 years, Margaret had privately embezzled $320,000 from the trust under false pretenses. The excuses varied wildly. Spa memberships billed as corporate wellness. Country club debts hidden as client entertainment. Loans to relatives and wardrobe styling for Morgan. I stopped at the last item. Clothes for Morgan. Martha sighed. Margaret ordered them to be bought through the trust. She said Morgan accompanies Christopher to galas, and if she dresses too poorly, it hurts the company's image. When she asked you to cover the deficit, she said it was for a cousin's dress. Found the text history. There it was. "Diana, wire the money to cover the trust gap for your cousin's engagement dress. The amount is $12,000. Date 2 months ago." That evening, Christopher had taken Morgan to a charity gala. She wore a champagne-colored gown and stood right beside him. Their photos ended up in Vogue. I asked him about it. He said, "It's strictly PR for the company." It turns out I was the one who personally financed his mistress's PR debut. I stared at the audit trail and suddenly burst out laughing. Richard looked at me with deep concern. "Diana, I highlighted the transaction. It's fine. Compile it for the fraud report." At 8 that night, Christopher called me. When I answered, his voice sounded exhausted. "Where are you?" "In the family office server room." He paused for a few seconds. "Are your lawyers still auditing?" "Diana, don't escalate this. My mother is getting older. She might have miscategorized some expenses." I looked at the screen. "Chris, did you know your mother used trust funds, which I then replenished to buy Morgan's evening gowns?" Absolute silence fell over the receiver. Continued. $12,000. Misclassified as cousin's engagement. His breathing grew heavy. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't know. I said all you knew was that she looked the part, stood next to you, and made you look powerful." After those words, he was silent for a long time. Finally he said, "I'll tell my mother to repay the trust." I scoffed. "Chris, do you still think this is just about SEC compliance?" His voice turned hoarse. "Then what is it about?" "It's about the fact that you all took my wealth and my labor to fund your illusions. It's about you using my silence as a PR shield. It's about you using our marriage to pave the way for an employee." Hung up the phone. Martha, standing nearby, spoke softly. "Mrs. Kensington. Morgan is outside." Her security badge was flagged. I looked up. Morgan was standing outside the glass doors of the server room. The arrogance from the dinner was gone. Now she looked terrified. "Diana, I need to speak with you." I unlocked the door, but didn't invite her in. About what? "I know you don't like me, but Christopher and I only have a professional relationship." I watched her. "If you only had a professional relationship, you wouldn't have grabbed my wrist and publicly humiliated me." Her eyes darted away. "I was under a lot of pressure from the executive team." I said nothing. She bit her lip, lowering her voice. "Diana, do you know why Chris allowed me to manage his personal calendar?" I looked up at her. It seemed she had finally found the exact spot to hurt me the most. "'Cause he said you were too cold, too corporate." My hand froze. Morgan continued. "He said you only cared about the trust and the audits. That you never fought for him, never caused a scene. As if you didn't care whether he was in this marriage or not. He told me to step up to see if it would provoke a reaction from you." I stared at her. "And so he let you put your hands on me?" She hurriedly shook her head. "Oh no. Chris didn't tell me to assault you. I just felt that you held all this power, but you didn't cherish him at all. That sentence was spoken softly, but it was incredibly venomous. I stood up. Morgan, do you know why I never fought with you? She stayed silent. I walked right up to her. Because a marriage is not a hostile corporate takeover where you can just outbid the competition, she pawed. Continued. Do you think Christopher let you answer his private lines, accompany him to galas, and manage the estate because he respected you? She looked up at me. I said, the truth is he was just a coward. She was stunned. He was too cowardly to manage his mother's embezzlement. Too cowardly to handle the board. Too cowardly to face my standards. So, he used you as a human shield, enjoying the ego boost of two women fighting over his attention. Morgan's expression changed. She didn't want to believe it. Well, Chris treats me as a partner. Smiled. Then let him sign a prenup with you. Her face turned to stone. Get out, I said. My lawyers are finishing the fraud report. She didn't leave. Suddenly, she reached for a stack of printed invoices on the desk. Richard immediately stepped between us. Do not touch the evidence. In the scuffle, Morgan knocked several sheets of paper onto the floor. I bent down to pick them up. One of them turned out to be a vendor kickback receipt for the new catering supplier. The recipient was not the corporation, but her personal offshore LLC, the amount $4,000. She instantly turned as white as a sheet. I looked at the paper, then slowly raised my eyes to her. Morgan, it turns out it's not that you don't know corporate compliance. I handed the paper to Richard. It's that you know exactly how to commit wire fraud. She backed away. Diana, listened to me. Cut her off. Save it for your deposition. Tears spilled from her eyes. Chris won't let you destroy my career like this. I looked at her. You're mistaken. Tomorrow at the emergency board meeting, I won't be destroying you. I'm going to show the Kensington family exactly whose money they've been playing with. The next day, the emergency meeting was convened by my mother-in-law, Margaret. The venue was the corporate boardroom in Manhattan. She had invited the family's senior partners and legal counsel, hoping to outnumber me. She sat near the head of the mahogany table with an icy expression. Morgan sat behind her looking as if she hadn't slept all night. Christopher sat on the other side. Seeing me and Richard walk in, he immediately stood up. I didn't look at him. I just took my seat. Margaret shoved a legal binder across the table. Diana, these are the terms of your exit. Since you and Chris have come to this, we will accept your resignation as trustee, but you will sign the NDA and you will not touch a single dime of the corporate assets. I didn't even open the binder. Margaret, it seems your lawyers forgot one clause. She frowned. Which one? The one where I report you to the Z. Someone in the room sucked in a sharp breath. Margaret's face turned rigid. Diana, this is not a negotiation tactic. Richard pulled our documents from his briefcase and distributed them. We prepared our own filings. Christopher looked at me. I placed the executive summary in the center of the table. First, the Kensington family is obligated to reimburse the personal funds I used to cover the trust deficits over the past 3 years totaling $650,000. The forensic audit is attached. Second, Margaret Kensington is obligated to return funds embezzled from the trust totaling $320,000. Third, Morgan is being formally reported for wire fraud and vendor kickbacks totaling $4,000, and my civil suit for battery and harassment will be filed tomorrow. Fourth, Christopher Kensington and I will file for divorce. Jointly acquired assets will be divided according to the law. The irrevocable trust agreement remains under my control until a judge orders otherwise. When I finished, the boardroom was dead silent. Margaret slammed her hand hard on the table. You're bluffing. I looked at her. Then I'll see you in federal court. Her face contorted. Uncle Charles picked up the audit reports. The longer he read, the darker his expression became. The corporate lawyers leaned in to look as well. No one was saying I was overreacting anymore because SEC violations don't care about family feelings. Morgan couldn't hold back. Diana, why do you insist on destroying me? I'm just an assistant. To you, this money is a rounding error. But to me, I cut her off sharply. When you grabbed my wrist and humiliated me in front of the executives, you weren't acting like just an assistant. She pouted. Christopher said quietly. Morgan, stop talking. Morgan seemed to snap. Chris, who did I take these risks for? I wanted to protect your image. You were the one who said your wife was a liability, that she didn't care about your legacy at all. Those words crashed into the boardroom. The lawyer stared at Christopher. Christopher's face darkened. I never gave you permission to discuss my marriage with the board. Morgan screamed through her tears. But it's the truth. You said she didn't get jealous, didn't fight for you. You said you wanted to test her. That's why I pushed her. Enough. Christopher jumped up abruptly. His voice thundered. Morgan flinched in terror. I sat in my seat. Suddenly I had no energy left, even for irony. Turns out I was right. A 35-year-old CEO resolves his marital insecurities by letting an employee trample all over his wife, waiting for her to snap to prove she cared. I looked up at Christopher. Is it true? Panic filled his eyes. Diana, I never told her to lay a hand on you. I asked a different question. Did you use her to test my boundaries? He fell silent. The answer was crystal clear. He nodded. All right. I signaled Richard, who pulled out an addendum. 5th. Christopher Kensington admits to gross negligence and fostering a hostile environment which led to the physical assault of the managing trustee. Christopher's face turned chalk white. Diana, sign it or my lawyers leaked the audit to the Wall Street Journal by noon. Margaret laughed out of pure panic. Chris will sign nothing. Diana, don't forget you utilized our connections for 3 years. You benefited from the Kensington name and now you want to burn it down. I looked at her. Margaret, I benefited from you. I opened the final page of the bank statements. For the last 3 years, my independent wealth subsidized your lifestyle to the tune of $15,000 a month just to keep you out of bankruptcy. I didn't touch a dime of Christopher's money. Let's calculate the corporate fallout when the shareholders realize you're entirely insolvent without me. Margaret couldn't find a single word to reply. Morgan started crying again. Diana, do you really have to be this ruthless? I looked at her coldly. Morgan, if I were truly ruthless, the police would have dragged you out of the estate in handcuffs 2 nights ago. She shut her mouth in fear. Christopher rubbed the bridge of his nose. His voice breaking. Diana, we will settle the financial discrepancies. But can we please handle the divorce privately without destroying the company? Said no. Why? He looked at me because I refused to protect the reputation of a man who watched an employee assault his wife and only cared about the PR optics. All the color drained from his face. The meeting ended abruptly. Margaret refused to agree to the repayment plan. Morgan was escorted out by HR. Christopher refused to sign the divorce papers. I wasn't surprised. I packed the documents back into my briefcase and stood up. And then from behind me, a scream rang out. Mrs. Kensington. I turned around. Margaret, clutching her stomach with a deathly pale face, was sliding off her chair. Morgan, who hadn't made it out the door yet, was the first to rush to her. Mrs. Kensington, what's wrong? Hearing this, everyone stared at me again. I stood by the door and didn't move an inch. Christopher scooped his mother into his arms. His voice shaking. Diana, where is her emergency medical file? I watched him. How absurd. When they were trying to force me out with nothing, I was a corporate liability. But the moment Margaret has an attack, they remember that I control the medical logistics. I answered calmly in the encrypted family office portal. I granted Morgan access 3 months ago. Christopher was stunned. Morgan screamed through her tears. Now is not the time for protocols. Call an ambulance. I looked at her. Morgan, didn't you say you were managing the family affairs now? I turned and walked toward the exit. Start by pulling up her allergy chart. Margaret was rushed to the VIP wing of Mount Si. Christopher called me an hour later. When I answered, his voice was very quiet. Diana, Mom is in the ICU. No. The doctors asked what she ingested. Morgan couldn't answer because she didn't read the files. I was standing right outside the hospital entrance looking up at the building. I'm already here. Silence fell over the line. I didn't come out of pity and I didn't come to manage your crisis PR. I came to clear my name before your lawyers try to blame me for medical negligence. The Kensington relatives and corporate fixers were crowded outside the hospital room. Morgan stood next to Christopher as white as a sheet. Seeing me, she immediately burst into tears. Diana, I swear I didn't know Mrs. Kensington couldn't eat wild mushrooms. You were the trustee. Why didn't you brief me? Before I could even speak, Fiona frowned in displeasure. Diana, you really should have executed a proper handover of her medical directives. I looked at Fiona. Are you sure I didn't? She faltered. Richard, standing beside me, pulled out a documented email trail. 3 months ago, when Morgan first took over event coordination, I had sent a secure email containing the medical directives to her and Christopher. I handed the iPad to the attending physician. Chronic gastritis, contraindications, wild mushrooms, alcohol. Emergency protocol is listed. Along with her private physician's contact, the doctor glanced at the screen. A very detailed medical directive. Morgan's face grew even wider. I scrolled down the email thread. The day I sent the file, Christopher replied. Received. Morgan also replied, saved to the corporate drive. Diana. I looked at her. Did you read it? Morgan's lips trembled. I was dealing with the Q3 reports back then. I opened another file. It was an incident report from Martha. This morning, Morgan ordered the kitchen staff to throw away the physical allergy list because it looked unprofessional on the fridge. Morgan desperately tried to justify herself. I just wanted the estate to look ready for the board members. I watched her. So, you destroyed a medical directive for optics and then you authorized a wild mushroom soup. Christopher closed his eyes. He turned to Morgan. Who authorized the menu? Morgan's tears flowed even harder. Mrs. Kensington said she wanted soup. I didn't know it was a liability. I swear I didn't do it on purpose. I said, ignorance is not a legal defense for gross negligence. The doctor stepped out of the room. The patient's condition is stable. Acute gastric spasm. Please ensure strict adherence to her dietary protocols moving forward. Christopher let out a sigh of relief. When Margaret was wheeled out in a chair, her face was gray. Seeing me, she looked conflicted for a second, then turned away. Why are you here? To legally establish that your hospitalization was the result of your employee's negligence, not mine. She couldn't find a response. Morgan dropped to her knees beside the wheelchair, sobbing. Mrs. Kensington, forgive me. This is my fault. Margaret always loved playing the magnanimous matriarch. She weakly patted Morgan's hand. You're an employee. You couldn't have known the family's private medical history. Scoff. How interesting. She's an employee, so she's forgiven for medical negligence, but she had the authority to physically assault me and dictate trust policy. I didn't bother arguing. Richard handed a thick folder to Christopher. This is the complete medical file, dietary protocol, and physician transfer forms. 3 copies. We are formally relinquishing all medical proxy duties. Christopher reached out, but Richard placed it on the table instead. I said, from today on, I am no longer Margaret's medical proxy. You can hire board-certified private nurses or let Morgan continue her hands-on approach. Margaret immediately flared up. Diana, what is the meaning of this? You're abandoning your fiduciary duty. I looked at her. You yourself just said Morgan couldn't have known because she's an outsider. Pause. I am resigning as trustee. I'm an outsider now too. Her face froze. Christopher said quietly, Diana, don't speak like this in a hospital. I turned to him. Then where should I speak? At dinner I was assaulted. At the chapel I was barred by security. At the board meeting you threatened my assets. The hospital is the only place left with witnesses. My words forced him into silence. The gazes of the relatives standing in the hallway shifted nervously. Fiona was the first to speak. Diana really did manage the risk well in the past. Last year, when my NDA was almost breached, she handled the press flawlessly. Uncle Charles looked at Margaret. Margaret, we always assumed you were the one overseeing the risk management. Margaret's face turned hideous. She wanted to say something, but the pain in her stomach made her grimace. Morgan suddenly stood up, barely able to stay on her feet. I know I don't have Diana's resources. I just wanted to take some of the workload off Chris. I don't know how to buy people's loyalty like she does. I looked at her. Morgan, managing a family office isn't buying loyalty. I tapped the medical folder. It means mitigating disasters before they happen. It means knowing the legal liabilities. It means sitting with the lawyers at 3 a.m. to kill a bad story. And when the family tells you the next day that you're too controlling, you still have to ensure their trust accounts don't bounce. I looked at Christopher. If you want an assistant to do a trustee's job, good luck with this, sissy. Morgan couldn't squeeze out another tear. Christopher looked at me. For the first time, explicit pain surfaced in his eyes. Diana, why did you never tell me the weight of what you were carrying? Because when I sent you the reports, you told me not to bother you. He stood frozen. As I was leaving the clinic, Christopher caught up to me by the elevator. I'll have my driver take you. I have my own car, Diana. His voice was heavily raspy. Please hold off on the resignation just for a few days. The board is panicking. The PR team is a mess. I looked at him. Chris, do you still want me to come back and clean up your corporate liabilities? He hastily replied. No, I just need you to stabilize the trust to handle the press and fix the legal mess Morgan made. I press the elevator button and then wait for you to tell me once again that I am too cold. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside. Christopher remained outside and suddenly said quietly, I made a massive error in judgment. It was the first time he had spoken those words, but for me it was already far too late. I looked at him. Your error wasn't today. The doors began to slowly close. Your error was assuming I would endure abuse to protect your stock price. I moved into a sprawling pre-war loft in Greenwich Village that I owned independently. No heavy Kensington mahogany. No constant frantic calls from the board of directors. No smelling another woman's perfume on Christopher's bespoke suits. The first night I slept for 8 hours straight. When you don't have to manage someone else's crisis, breathing becomes remarkably easy. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the concierge buzzed my unit. Christopher was downstairs. He was wearing the same overcoat, dark circles under his eyes. I told security to let him up, but I didn't invite him past the foyer. What happened? He was holding a legal envelope. The corporate lawyers reviewed your audit. The reimbursements have been wired. I looked at him. But he hesitated. I need to see your wrist. That's inappropriate. And my lawyer has the photos. His fingers twitched. Before, he had total access to my life. Now, he was just another visitor waiting in the foyer. This shift was clearly causing him pain. Diana, we need to talk off the record. Let's go to the coffee shop across the street. 10 minutes later, we were sitting in a private corner. I ordered an espresso. Christopher didn't drink anything. He placed a document on the table. I forced my mother to liquidate some assets. The embezzled funds are back in the trust. He nodded. Excellent. I pulled out a document of my own. This is the finalized divorce settlement. No NDAs, no gag orders. His face changed. Diana, I didn't come to sign that. But it is the only contract on the table. He stared at the agreement, the veins on his hands bulging. Do you really want to detonate this marriage? Asked in return. Detonate? Chris, your employee physically assaulted me. Your mother committed fraud. You used another woman to test my emotional limits. And you think I'm the one detonating things. His voice grew quieter. I admit my negligence caused this, but I never wanted a divorce. I answered. Because a divorce tanks your public image, and if I stay, the only one suffering is me. He palled and remained silent for a long time. Finally he said, I made a fatal miscalculation with Morgan. I waited for him to continue. When she first started, she was eager and emotionally expressive. All these years you were always so composed. No matter what crisis hit the company, you just handled it legally and quietly. You never panicked. Sometimes I felt like you were managing an asset, not loving a husband. He gave a bitter chuckle. I wanted to see if you would fight for me. I stared at him. So, you allowed a subordinate to encroach on my life to stroke your ego. He gripped his coffee cup. I didn't think she would get physical. Course you didn't. I said. You just like that she made you feel like a king. You like the idea of two women fighting over your attention while you played the oblivious CEO. He jerked his head up. I'm not a sociopath. Then what are you? He couldn't answer. I answered for him. You're the kind of man who thinks that as long as you didn't throw the punch yourself, you aren't responsible for the bruise. You mistake a wife's professional dignity for coldness, and her loyalty for an endless tolerance of disrespect. Christopher's face slowly turned ashen. I pushed the divorce settlement toward him. Clear's throat. Sign it, he stared at the paper. I won't sign it. I wasn't surprised. Then my lawyers file the litigation publicly tomorrow morning. A flash of panic crossed his eyes. Diana, are you really going to burn me to the ground over one incident? I looked down at my wrist. The bruise was fading to yellow, but the mark of his inaction remained. I raised my head. Chris, do you know when you lost my loyalty? He watched me. Not when Morgan grabbed me. His breath hitched. But when you asked why I was making a scene, instead of asking if I was hurt after those words. His eyes turned red. But his tears no longer moved me. I stood up. My attorney will contact yours. We'll meet in court. As soon as I walked out of the coffee shop, my phone vibrated. The family group chat had exploded again. Morgan had posted a screenshot of a wire transfer from Margaret to me. The amount $2,000. The caption read, Diana isn't the saint she claims to be. She took payouts from the trust too. Hypocrite. An uproar erupted in the chat. Board members demanded answers. I stopped on the sidewalk. Christopher walked out after me and saw the messages too. His face darkened and he immediately dialed Morgan's number. I pressed my hand over his phone. Don't bother. He looked at me. I opened my secure files. I had the complete audit trail of those $2,000. The day it arrived, I had split it into 3 payments. Margaret's private physician, emergency estate repairs, and Aunt Patricia's children's prep school tuition. Morgan had cropped the screenshot to hide the memos. I sent the unedited transaction logs to the chat along with the receipts. I wrote Morgan before attempting corporate espionage. Learn how to read a full ledger. Silence descended on the chat. Uncle Charles replied, I verify this. Diana paid the tuition directly. Fiona added. Diana also paid the doctor that day. Morgan didn't write another word. Christopher stared at the screen, furious. Where did she get classified trust documents? I looked at him. Ask your mother. His face contorted with fury. Put my phone away. Chris, you see, by leaving you, I no longer have to manage your family's incompetence. I only have to manage my portfolio. I wasn't originally invited to Uncle Charles's 60th birthday bash, but he called me himself. Diana, you need to be here. The board requires a formal accounting before you sever ties completely. I knew he wasn't entirely on my side. He just wanted to stop the bleeding in the corporate accounts, but that was enough. I didn't need protection. I needed them to face the audit. The dinner was held at the estate. This time, Uncle Charles sat at the head of the table. Margaret looked terrible but kept her mouth shut. Morgan was there, dressed modestly, standing in the back like an assistant again. When I walked in with Richard, all eyes turned to us. I wore a sharp, tailored black suit, carrying the legal binders. Margaret raised her glass nervously. Today is Uncle Charles's birthday. No legal threats tonight. Uncle Charles set his glass down. Margaret, there will be no threats, but we will review the audit. Margaret's face turned to stone. Uncle Charles looked at me. Diana, present the findings. He nodded. No PowerPoint, just verified financial reports. Sometimes cold hard data hits the hardest. First, the trust loans, who borrowed what, when, and the interest owed. The cousin's wife blushed. We really didn't know it was your independent money keeping the trust afloat. We'll wire the balance next week. The atmosphere shifted. Before they thought my demands were petty. Now faced with IRS documentation. They were terrified of tax fraud. Next, my mother-in-law's personal embezzlement. Margaret couldn't hold it in. Diana, do you have to ruin my reputation today? I looked at her. Margaret, when you tried to extort me into signing an NDA and leaving with nothing, you weren't worried about my reputation. She pouted. I pulled out the audit regarding Morgan's evening gown. Morgan immediately raised her head. I didn't know it was trust money. He nodded. Did you know it was corporate theft? She couldn't answer. Continued. You didn't know the origin of the funds, yet you wore that dress for PR photos. You didn't know the compliance rules, yet you grabbed my wrist to assert authority. You didn't know Margaret's medical history, yet you authorized her meals. Morgan, does your entire career consist of profound ignorance while others bear the legal liability? Morgan's face flushed crimson. Christopher said quietly. Morgan, apologize. She snapped her head around. Chris, apologize. His tone grew harsher now. Tears flooded from Morgan's eyes. Diana, I'm sorry. I watched her. For what exactly? Her lips trembled. I listed them. For the assault, for the wire fraud, for the defamation, or for barring the managing trustee from a property. She sobbed so hard she couldn't speak. Uncle Charles frowned. We need to address the vendor kickbacks. I pulled out the offshore LLC documents. Morgan shook her head violently. I didn't steal. I was just taking a standard commission. Richard slid the corporate bylaws forward. Taking unauthorized commissions from corporate vendors is wire fraud. Miss Morgan. She was so terrified she stopped crying. Christopher took the paper, his face turning ice cold. Morgan, explain. She clutched his sleeve. Chris, I just needed the money. I was going to pay it back. I didn't mean to defraud the company. Uncle Charles scoffed. You didn't defraud the company. You defrauded Diana because you knew her personal wealth was covering the deficits. You were stealing directly from her. Morgan lowered her head. Felt no joy. They all knew I had been paying for years. They only cared now because the SEC was a threat. Morgan suddenly snapped. Now you're all blaming me. Didn't you allow me to have this access? She turned to Christopher. Chris, you told me your wife was a cold corporate machine. You told me to insert myself into the family to see if she would react. Christopher's face contorted. I never authorized you to commit fraud or assault my wife. Morgan screamed. But you never stopped me. I answered her private calls. You stayed silent. I bought clothes on the company card. You stayed silent. And when I grabbed her, you cared more about the board than you did about her. A dead silence hung in the room. Everyone looked at Christopher. He slowly turned pale. Here it was. The real bill. Not the money but his complicity. Christopher looked at Morgan. You are terminated immediately. Corporate security will escort you out. The stolen funds must be returned within 48 hours or we press federal charges. Morgan went limp. Chris, you can't do this. Christopher looked at me. Diana, I am incredibly sorry. This was the second time, but nothing stirred in my soul. I closed the binder. Apology noted. A glimmer of hope sparked in his eyes. Continued. Now sign the divorce settlement. The hope died. Before I left, Morgan looked at me with unbridled hatred. If you hadn't clung so tightly to your power, none of this would have happened. I stood up. I walked right up to her. I pointed to the armchair at the head of the table. I sat there because I carried the legal and financial liability for this entire corporation. Do you want to sit there? Take it. First assume 3 years of SEC audits, 3 years of covering trust deficits, 3 years of prairie crisis, and 3 years of disrespect. Morgan broke down completely. I don't want it. He nodded. Excellent. Richard placed a folder in front of her. This is the civil suit for battery and harassment. We have the medical photos of the bruising and 14 witnesses. Morgan panicked. Chris, help me. Christopher didn't answer. You wanted to play corporate politics. I told her. Welcome to the boardroom. The next morning, the official handover took place at the corporate offices. Margaret, Uncle Charles, and the legal team were present. I placed my master security fob and the encrypted hard drives on the conference table. I signed the transfer of the managing trustee title back to the board. Margaret stared at the fob. I handed the final folder to her lawyers. This is the pre-litigation demand for the remaining embezzled funds. Margaret's hands shook. Diana, I am your mother-in-law. Not for long, I replied. Christopher signed the divorce settlement at 3 p.m. that afternoon. His pen hovered over the signature line for a long time before he finally wrote his name, cementing the end of our merger. When we stepped outside the law firm, the sky was overcast. Christopher stood next to me. During the mandatory cooling-off period, can I call you? Regarding the legal logistics, yes. And regarding everything else, I didn't answer. He gave a bitter chuckle. Understand. Before we parted ways, he called out, Diana, if that night I had defended you immediately, would you still have left? I turned to him. Yes, because grabbing my wrist wasn't the beginning. It was just the moment the last threat of my tolerance snapped. On the final day of the cooling-off period, we finalized the divorce at City Hall. Christopher handed me an envelope containing the first installment of his mother's debt. I went to the estate, he said quietly. The board is furious. My mother is panicked. The accounts are a mess. Only now do I understand. You didn't just manage the money. You absorbed all the chaos so I could play the visionary CEO. I watched the electronic display board. I thought you were too cold, he whispered. I didn't realize your composure was the only thing keeping this family from collapsing. I am not naturally this cold, I told him. I waited for you to manage your family. I waited for you to establish boundaries. I waited for you to protect me, but all I waited for was you asking why I was making a scene. His eyes filled with tears. Sorry. I accept your apology, I said, but I will not return. When the clerk finalized the paperwork, I tucked the decree into my bag. I didn't return my wedding ring. I took it to a private jeweler in Manhattan, had it melted down into a solid heavy platinum band, and instructed them to engrave it. Just your name? The jeweler asked. Just my name, I confirmed. I slipped it onto my right hand. It didn't signify a marriage, nor a corporate merger, nor the status of a billionaire's wife. It reminded me of only one thing. True power isn't about sitting at the head of the table. It's knowing you have the leverage to walk away and let the table collapse without.